So, Charlie, you live in the Villages located in Central Florida, which is the largest retirement community in the world with over 125,000 residents, 60,000 golf carts, 50 swimming pools, 12 championship golf courses, and numerous restaurants. What makes the Villages such a popular destination for retirees? What sets it apart from other 55 plus communities? And just tell us, when you moved there, and let's just get the ball rolling with that.
Well, Jesse, let me clarify. I spend the majority of my year, my wife and I, here in Manitowoc, Wisconsin. But we will be, for example, this coming snowbird season, we'll be spending February, March, and April at the Villages. And it has a lot of appealing characteristics that mean that thousands of people, literally 140,000 people, are now calling the Villages home, either year-round or seasonal, like you might say we do. And that's up from about 110,000 when we first became aware of the Villages about 6 years ago. And certainly, what is the principal appeal to those in the upper Midwest, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Ohio, Michigan, Illinois, is that typically during the months that we snowbird and other Midwesterners go to the Villages, we're looking at temperatures 30 to 50 degrees above if we had stayed home. We are the epitome of the definition of snowbird. And I got asked that recently by my 98-year-old mother, who basically said, why would you go to Florida? And the simple reason is that when it's 25 degrees in early February in the upper part of the Midwest, including where we live, about 40 miles from Green Bay, Wisconsin, it's typically going to be in the mid to upper 70s in the Villages. And it's typically going to be sunny and pleasant weather, and you'll be able to take advantage of the amenities that the Morse family, which are the patriarchs of the Villages, have created. All of the facilities you mentioned, the swimming pools. I'm not sure if you mentioned the pickleball courts, which they're up to 275 pickleball courts. When we first started going to the Villages, they were about 175. So they're not Johnny-come-lately to pickleball. The Villages has been the mecca for senior pickleball for many, many years. They still have dozens and dozens, for example, of tennis courts. And oftentimes, as you know, Jesse, pickleball has become extremely popular as a recreational pastime, or people like me who play it as a competitive sport. And oftentimes, the tennis courts next to the pickleball complex, and there's about 45 complexes of pickleball, the tennis courts are often empty. And when the Morse family gets challenged by the pickleball folks to convert the tennis courts to pickleball, what they say is, no, we have promised people that there'll be tennis courts. We'll just keep adding on pickleball courts for you. And so it's the facilities and the option of having an extremely active lifestyle as a senior. And the vast majority of people at the Villages are above the age of 60. I wouldn't be shocked if the average age was in the low 70s. So it's just the advantage of you pay your $189 per month household recreation amenity fee, and that makes for unlimited golf, unlimited pickleball, the pools, and all the other dozens of different kinds of recreational opportunities. If you want to be a hermit and stay inside your home, you can. But for me, and I think the majority of people who have come to like the Villages, it's like, well, why? If you're just going to stay inside your home, you might as well stay around Ann Arbor, Michigan. You might as well live in Syracuse, New York. Because if you're going to the Villages as a seasonal person, like my wife and I, and we do it typically either through Vrbo or through private handshake rental deals with owners, you're paying for your housing on top of what, of course, you already own. The Villages offers an incredible array of recreational opportunities. And I would say another thing that is very attractive to my wife and I is we very much like live music. And they have 4 town squares now. Used to be 3, but now they have 4. And there is live music from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m., 364 days of the year. The only day that they don't have live music is Christmas. And other than that, it's live bands at 4 different stages every single night. Based on the age group that goes to the villages, a lot of them are 60s cover bands, 70s cover bands. But some of the more popular bands are heavy metal cover bands and blues cover bands. When you've got 140,000 people, you've got enough people to enjoy not just listening to Beatles music and not just listening to Rolling Stones and not just listening to Adele. There's all sorts of genre of music. And I was pleasantly surprised when a heavy metal cover band, so picture Metallica with a bunch of 70-year-olds. It's interesting. And the other very interesting feature of the live music, and then I'm going to shut up for a moment and have you ask some more questions. The number of people who dance, hundreds of people dance at the various squares during the musical performances. It seems like you come down to the villages and you lose your inhibition to sort of semi-make a fool of yourself on the dance floor. And nobody's going to look disapprovingly of you if you're an awkward dancer at the villages dancing to Rocky and the Rollers or Johnny and the Delights or any of the other bands that play at the villages year-round.
So, Charlie, you said that you heard about the villages 6 years ago. So how long have you been going there?
Since that time. My wife's older brother was a seasonal visitor to the villages, and he's a Wisconsin native. And he followed the pattern of many of the people from the upper Midwest who have flocked to the villages. He was a month at a time, then he became 3 months, then he became 4 months, and then he bought. And what I like, by the way, about my brother-in-law's neighborhood, and there's like 45 neighborhoods within the villages, which at this point is about a 10-mile by 20-mile rectangle, and the family keeps gobbling up scrub brush, not Everglades, but just sort of unused agricultural land and converting it into housing and new neighborhoods. He's in the original orange blossom. The villages started, as you probably know from your research, back in the early 80s as basically just a trailer home, manufactured home park. And he's in the original neighborhood, and it's cool because it's not cookie cutter homes. They don't all look alike. And so he basically found a double wide, an aging double wide original that was for sale. And he basically said, take it away, throw it away. And then he worked with the management company here, and they have a variety of floor plans and different square footage and bedroom configuration and all that. And he basically said, I'll take plan 6A. And so he had a 3-bedroom home created for himself. And now he has become like many of these upper Midwest people. He goes just after Labor Day and stays to just before Memorial Day. And then he goes back to Wisconsin. The next step for a lot of these people, and one I would never want to take, is they basically make the villages their year-round home. But for me, no thanks to a Florida summer. For those who have grown accustomed to hot, humid weather in the summertime, fine, stay around year-round. But for those of us like me who come from Wisconsin, our attitude is February, March, April, get me out of here. But summer months are gorgeous in Wisconsin.
So how long have you been retired for, Charlie?
It's now been just over 8 years. Time really flies. Yeah.
So you lived in Wisconsin full-time year-round for 2 years after retirement, and then that's when you started...
That's only because I couldn't get my wife to retire.
Oh, because you said your wife's younger than you. So basically, you would have moved to the villages prior to that, had she...
not moved. Remember, that. I mean,
Right, Snowbird.
Snowbird. Yeah,
right.
Right. The way I said it to someone today is that Wisconsin has about 2 good summer months, but the weather January through April, and we'll be there in Florida January through April of 2024, those are nice summer days for people who live in Wisconsin. So now I get 6 months of summer, and then I get a couple of months of spring and fall and a month of winter here in Wisconsin. And then I jumped straight from 25-degree weather, cold, blustery snow, and jumped straight from that into 70s and 80s weather for 4 months. So I think I have the best of all worlds. And I do have two local grandchildren, an 8-year-old granddaughter, 6-year-old grandson. I'll be babysitting them later this afternoon, picking them up from school, taking the granddaughter to dance. So there's a lot of reasons for us to not have Florida be a year-round home. But that's oftentimes the transition that people make who have come from all across the upper Midwest and even California. There's thousands of people who have California homes, but they also have villages homes. But the next transition is to become a year-rounder, either because they can't afford to keep up 2 houses, or they just are so enamored by the lifestyle of what the villages offers. And it's not the only place we've gone in Florida, not the only place we enjoy, and we can talk about those, but it becomes their year-round home.
You said that you're currently renting right now. So what do you do?
We'll be renting in Florida for 4 months, correct.
This is coming up is your 6th season.
Pretty much, although we have also spent snowbird months in Alabama, in Arizona, in California, in Hawaii.
What is your favorite of those locations? And then give us some price comparison between all those. When someone hears Alabama, they probably think that might be the best deal, but to hear it from you.
And here's the simplistic way to look at it. And especially, and really we're focused on the seasonal kind of person, the snowbird kind of season. January and February in Alabama will definitely be less than Florida. However, it's going to be 10 to 15 degrees colder. So in January, when you're at the villages and you're about 45 miles northwest of Orlando, you're going to be consistently in the low 70s. But if you were, say, in Gulf Shores or Orange Beach, Alabama, which are beautiful parts of the Gulf of Mexico shoreline west of Pensacola, Florida, but you're going to be in the 50s and you're going to be in the low 60s. And instead of spending, say, around $5,000 to $6,000 a month to rent a nice place at the villages in January and February, you may very well be half that, $3,000 a month, $4,000 a month if you're in Gulf Shores near Mobile, Alabama, etc. But I'm spoiled. I'm willing to spend the extra money to get the extra 12, 13 degrees. And then if you were, say, going to be in Arizona, if you're going to be in Scottsdale or someplace like that in January and February, rates are going to be similar to the villages. They're going to be higher than Alabama. And then if you choose to snowbird in California, that's going to be tremendously variable in terms of price, because you're easily going to be looking at, say, like that $6,000 a month if you're in a community like Santa Monica. But if you go further up the coast and maybe you're in Central California coast, it's going to be a lot less. So I'm not going to generalize about snowbirding monthly costs in California when it's such a huge state and has so many different kinds of options. Hawaii is a wonderful place to go any time of the year. As someone who's gone to Maui 15 times, I buy into the slogan, Maui no Ka'oi. And Maui no Ka'oi means Maui is the best. And we've had the opportunity to go to Maui more than a dozen times, and we stayed at a place about 6 miles north of Lahaina. And our heart breaks when you think of Lahaina literally burned to the ground. We had walked Front Street dozens and dozens of times. And yes, it looks like the old banyan tree is going to make it, but they're not going to be able to recreate the atmosphere of a 150-year-old whalers village, and of course the former capital of the Kingdom of Hawaii. So realistically, Florida will probably still be our go-to. Now, we're really spoiled. Come April, and we're done with our villages, if the weather in Wisconsin for early part of May is not looking very nice, we'll probably jump over at Gulf Shores or Orange Beach in Alabama and spend a couple of weeks there before we go home.
What was the cost comparison difference between Hawaii or Maui and the villages?
Hawaii is going to be similar to Florida. And again, there it's variable too. If you're going to stay at the Wailea Grand Intercontinental on the southwest side of Maui, you're going to be closer, especially if you're staying at a hotel. I mean, if you're going to stay at a hotel, you're easily going to be in the $400 to $500 a night range. And if you're going to stay at a nice long-term condo in Wailea, you're easily going to be up around $6,000 to $10,000 a month. If you stay in a smaller place in Kihei or in Kahului or Wailuku, it's going to be considerably less. Just like there's a lot of variability in California, Maui would be the same thing. It depends on where you're staying.
You're snowbirding to basically avoid the cold weather. You're not really doing it to save money. Some people try to live to save money. You're just doing it to have fun and get out of
Well, I don't know. Our house has been paid for a long time. And yes, I mean, groceries actually are going to be about this, are not that different grocery price wise, because there's major supermarkets in the villages, of course. For what it's worth, the dominant chain in the South, as you may well know, is Publix. So no, we're not saving money by going. No, it's extra money out of our pocket. You can't take it with you. And I want to enjoy playing pickleball outdoors. And even though my wife doesn't play it, she and I both bike a lot. And so we bike a lot here in Wisconsin. And by going to Florida for 4 months, we get to stay outside and bike all those 4 months.
So how old are you, Charlie, and your wife?
I turned 72 a little while ago, and my wife will turn 70. Not looking forward to it, but she'll turn 70 in February.
Wow. And do you anticipate that you're going to continue to do this 4-month snowbirding for the rest of your time on Earth, or do you?
I hope so. I know there are people who, you know, and at the moment, it's no big deal I mean, I drive down in 2 days. And from where we live to the villages is 1,300 miles. And for what it's worth, we typically go from Manitowoc, Wisconsin. As I say, we're just south of Green Bay. And we get down to a city called Murfreesboro, just south of Nashville for day one, and then get down to the villages in the second day. But some people, as they age, admittedly don't like putting in 650, 700-mile driving days. But before I would stop going, I would just say, okay, maybe we'll do it in 3 days instead of doing it in 2. Because, yeah, once you get used to being able to spend 4 months in nice warm weather in winter, I don't know why I'd ever want to give it up. And I'm not so spoiled. Now, for those folks who have made Florida either their year-round home or say their 9-month home, you know, the Labor Day to Memorial Day people, a lot of them, they basically, it's amazing how they've got their Toyota SUV or whatever. They've got their one car back in Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, whatever, and they've got their same car in their garage in the villages. They just fly back and forth. If you're in the same unit for 9 months of the year, or you own a place there, well, then you just outfit it as a second home. And oftentimes those folks have the financial means to just fly back and forth and have a car in each place.
What percentage of the people in the villages do you think are snowbirds?
I'm guessing that it's getting smaller. I think the number of people who are buying in and having it be their principal residence or their year-round exclusive residence is the majority now. That would be my sense. And part of it, and there's some politics you could talk about with the villages, but the relevant political fact here is that, as you may know, Florida has no personal income tax. And so for those people of means, and typically of means more than my wife and I, that makes a difference to them when they don't have to pay state income tax. And if they are in Florida for 6 months and a day, they can then become Floridians for the purpose of escaping that state income tax.
How would you say living in the villages where it's a 55-plus active retirement community where you have a bunch of things going on, how would that compare to when you were in Maui or when you were in Tucson, Arizona, or Alabama? Like, do you enjoy that aspect of it?
I do enjoy multi-generational, without a doubt, although where my multi-generational typically comes into play, 2 places. One, this particular county in Wisconsin has a huge YMCA that has 2 basketball courts, 2 pools, 6 pickleball courts, 3 tennis courts, etc. And I really enjoy seeing this morning 3-year-olds heading out to play. So I very much enjoy the multi-generational. Where you see the multi-generational at the villages is that of their like 75 pools, many of them are designated as family pools. And these are typically going to be visiting sons and daughters, visiting grandchildren of the seniors who are then snowbirding or living at the villages year round. And when a pool is equidistant for me, an adults only pool or a family pool, I'll choose the family pool every time because I get a kick out of kids playing in the water. And I get a kick out of, and this may sound a little strange, I get a kick out of saying to some 10-year-old kid, let's see who can swim underwater the furthest, you or me, the old man. Or play. Now, I know this sounds strange, but I don't care. I'm the type of guy who wears those T-shirts or those shirts that says, I may be getting older, but I refuse to grow up. Well, that's me. So when I go to a family pool, let's play Marco Polo. But realistically, there aren't that many people under the age of 50 at the town squares for the live music. It depends on the time. If it's Easter break or winter break, then it's a noticeable, dramatic increase in younger people during what appears to be an Easter break time or a winter break time. And then these kids and their families come flocking down from the Midwest down to visit grandma and grandpa where it's warm at the villages.
Did you ever think about living abroad for those 4 months, like maybe going to Colombia or Panama or Costa Rica or France?
Well,
or
Jesse, I know that your parents spent a lot of time in Panama, and that sounds intriguing to me. My overseas experiences are also spoiled. My wife and I will be taking our 3rd Viking cruise this next year, and we've taken their most popular river cruise from Budapest to Amsterdam, and that was Hungary and Germany and the Czech Republic and the Netherlands. And then we also did the most popular ocean cruise, which is from Barcelona. We took it from Barcelona to Rome, Rome to Venice. And so that's Spain and France and Italy and Croatia. We weren't able to get into Monaco because of rough harbor conditions. This is a long-winded way of saying we have enjoyed visiting about 15 countries, hope to visit dozens more. But as far as actually living outside the U.S. for like a winter season, like your parents have adventurously done, haven't really seriously thought about it, but maybe I should.
Why is the Villages the largest retirement community in the world? If you were to take all the retirees in Costa Rica and Panama and Ecuador and Colombia from, you say, Canada or the U.S. or the U.K., the Villages of Florida would dwarf them combined.
One of the key reasons, and it's one that I only partially accept, and this is in the bubble, is a term that you hear used by people who go to the villages. And in the bubble, what they mean by that is with the recreational facilities, the music, the golf, the tennis, shopping, the restaurants, why would I ever leave the villages? Everything is available right here in the bubble. And they feel safe. And my attitude is, okay, that's fine, but I don't want to spend all my time in the bubble. So my wife and I, we get out of the bubble to go to, say, St. Augustine, go to the Atlantic side for a few days, go to St. Petersburg, go to Tampa, go to Clearwater, go to Dunedin. We believe that, yes, the villages is a wonderful place to be, but we don't commit ourselves to staying in the bubble. And to me, there is no perfect place that is going to keep me there all the time, nonstop, as much as I might like a place. I like variety in my life. For example, one of the ways we enjoy getting out of the bubble is going to the St. Petersburg area and biking. And again, bicycling is important to us. Biking the Pinellas Trail. And the Pinellas Trail is that 60-mile bike trail that runs from St. Petersburg through Largo, through Clearwater, through Dunedin, and up to Tarpon Springs. And it's a wonderful bike trail. Apparently the most used bike trail in the United States. And I like the ocean. And you've got your man-made lakes and natural lakes in the villages and in the surrounding area. But I grew up in Southern California. And I met my wife in Santa Monica. And I live not far from the beach. So I like getting out to an ocean. We never spent an extended period of time in the desert. The place we would go to frequently is Indian Wells tennis tournament, is the biggest tennis tournament in the U.S. other than the U.S. Open. And it's a marvelous venue to watch tennis. But if somebody said, Charlie, you either have to spend 4 months near the ocean or 4 months in a desert environment, I'd say, put me in the ocean. So the villages is nice that you're inland, but you're only an hour and a half drive to getting out to the Gulf of Mexico. And you're really only about a 2-hour drive to get out to the Atlantic Ocean.
And since you're more centrally located, you don't have to worry about the hurricanes for the most part, versus if you were.
That's okay. That raises an interesting situation. Have you heard, Jesse, the term first world problem?
Oh, yeah. Not just first world problems, but 1% problems, you know?
Okay. Well, I'm sure my wife and I are in the top 1% economically, but we're not hurting. And we're definitely first world. So the first world problem story I'll tell you is that in late September of 2022, we had already booked to stay 4 months in the south end of Fort Myers, midway between Sanibel Island and Fort Myers Beach. And we're on a Viking cruise ship in the middle of the Mediterranean Ocean. And it's September the 29th, and we did a private handshake deal with the owner, for lack of a better way to put it, trailer home. Although these mobile homes, of course, they're not mobile. They're going nowhere. They're just small apartments. And I live texted. It's 2 a.m. Barcelona time, 7 p.m. Nashville time, where the owner lives. And I'm saying to the owner, this is not the text I wanted to send, but the deal we had was that if we didn't back out by October 1st, you were going to keep our 4 months worth of rental for our snowbird season. And Hurricane Ian had blown through on September 28th. And I said, is your home going to be habitable come January 1st? And she said, no way, it's rubble. Where do I send the refund? We're now 13 months later, and that high-end mobile home park has still not reopened. So we double booked for January 2024. We double booked a place in Iona, Florida, and a place in Dunedin, thinking which one might get hit by a hurricane. Well, the Dunedin one actually got hit by some pretty bad winds. So this is a long-winded way of saying the Villages has had some high winds in the past, 50, 60, 70 miles an hour. But what they don't get and did not and won't ever get compared to the Fort Myers area and Sanibel Island, which was just decimated, you won't get the storm surge of water. So the place we were going to have stayed at in a small section of sort of southwest Fort Myers called Iona, that's where we're going to be this January. But earlier this year, the 4 months, the hurricane wiped it out. So the first world problem is I'm sitting on a Viking cruise ship in the lap of luxury, but we've lost where we're going to Snowbird that season. What do I do now? Well, as long as you've got a Wi-Fi connection or even a cell connection, but especially a Wi-Fi connection, anywhere in the world, it's no big deal. You just get up on Airbnb, or we prefer Vrbo, and within a half an hour, we'd already made alternate housing accommodations.
It seems like you actually switch up where you stay most of the years then. You don't really go back to the Villages every year.
What we really like, the Villages is a wonderful number one, but we were going to have stayed for 4 months at this particular place because, one, we like the feel of the place. We don't mind the hugeness of the Villages, but it was neat. It was fun to go biking with people or to go play pickleball, and then they just had one big pool, and you would run into the same people. And so it was easier to form sort of newfound friendships and newfound relationships. So no, but again, that's first world. Oh, gee, which wonderful place do I want to be at? Well, this one is like only a 98 out of 100, and this one's 96 out of 100. Do I have to settle for that one? I'm not complaining.
I think where my parents live in Panama, there's maybe 100, 150 expats in that whole area in several different communities within maybe a 20-kilometer radius. So they all kind of find each other. I think that's a good point because when you're talking the Villages, like you're saying, there's over 125, 130,000.
140,000. And their master plan says to go to 250,000 in the next 15 years.
Right. It's 250,000 people. It's a lot of retirees.
And the reason it's going to happen is because they are smart enough that when they're adding these neighborhoods, dozens of homes at a time, they keep adding the pools, they add golf courses, they add infrastructure. It's not like you've got more people competing for a limited number of tee times or more people competing for a limited number of tennis courts, pickleball courts, whatever. They're smart enough, and it's intuitively logical. Make sure you keep adding to the infrastructure so that you don't run in to people going, well, why would I move to the villages when it's too tough to get on the court or too tough to get on the golf course?
So for people that are looking to maybe retire someplace warm and save a little bit of money and live full-time year-round, what would you recommend?
I would probably say like a Gulf Shores in Orange Beach. Granted, as I said before, I prefer mid-70s over low 60s in January and February. But yeah, you're going to get more bang for your buck in like a Gulf Shores or in Orange Beach. The cheapest housing you're going to get at the villages is probably going to start these days around $325,000 for a relatively modest 2-bedroom home. Probably going to be closer to $200,000 for similar housing in that part of Alabama. Of course, a lot of that equation for people is going to be dependent upon, are they going to sell their house in wherever they are now and have that be available equity for them to reinvest in what is going to become their new exclusive residence, not second home?
Yeah, I like the way that you do it. I think rent a place for 4 or 5 months. That way you can switch it up if you want to. You have so much flexibility. Do you plan on continuing that for the foreseeable future?
I think so, because I think there's still a lot of places I'd like to explore. Like in Florida, I'd like to explore Hollywood, Florida. I'd like to explore more of St. Augustine area. Heck, I could see spending a month or two down in Key West or in any of those communities that are on that, 80-mile drive down US 1 south out of Miami going to the tip at Key West. And I'd like to get back to where we end up maybe spending a month in Indian Wells. We like the tennis tournament there. And maybe if West Maui can reopen, well, I definitely want to get to Maui again, but it's going to be an emotional actually, of course, at the moment, you can't even get close to Lahaina, and you shouldn't. It's sort of a sacred site right now, and it's going to be fascinating to see how they try to bounce back from that. That's going to be really tough, just like it has been traumatic for the people of Fort Myers Beach and Sanibel Island. I have a friend who got back from Sanibel Island 48 hours ago, and he told me that normally Sanibel Island, the post office delivers mail to 7,000 addresses. It's now 1,000 addresses. And Fort Myers Beach, I've seen the videos, and that's been a good 14 months now. And you can get up on YouTube and see videos of Estero Boulevard, the main drag, that 9-mile main drag between the bridge to Fort Myers Beach and to the bridge to Lovers Key State Park at the south end of Estero as you would head south towards Naples, etc. And you can see video that was shot maybe only 2 or 3 days before Hurricane Ian went through. And then you look at it now, and there's still mountainous piles of rubble, still. And you won't ever get back the vibe of these mom and pop 1950s era 1-story, 2-story motels, these little mom and pop restaurants that Fort Myers Beach was known for. Of course, the Fort Myers Beach people hope they're going to get a massive shot in the economic arm later this month when Margaritaville opens up for good. Margaritaville is like 420 rooms or so. Average nightly room rate is $525. Man, I'd like to know what's going to justify spending $525 a night at Margaritaville. I don't know who Jimmy Buffett's heirs are, but assuming they've got some licensing royalties coming in off these Margaritaville resorts. Anyway, but Fort Myers Beach is going to take many, many more years to recover, and so will Sanibel Island.
When I was researching the villages, it seems like there's either people love it or people hate it, but it seems like the people that hate it really haven't been there. It just seems like there's some bad publicity hearing about swinger culture, high STDs, and whatever else they wanted to talk about. But then you watch people that are from there and they're like, oh, that's just like people that are, stuff makes the headlines, or those people don't really live here.
I think that's probably true. And my personal lifestyle, all my adult life is, I'm not going to say things good about a place or things bad about a place until I've experienced it firsthand. Now, I can understand people who don't like the villages. a lot of them would be like, oh, the traffic congestion is ridiculous. Or if you don't like roundabouts, don't go to the villages, because they've got about 35 roundabouts in the villages alone. Actually, the biggest split at the moment is people who do live there. And the north end of the villages was the original part of the villages around Spanish Springs. Most all of the growth is at the southern end of that rectangle, much of it even south of the Florida Turnpike. And the people up in the northern part feel sort of ignored. And as evidenced, for example, by a movie theater in their neighborhood that closed about 3 years ago and has never reopened. So, yeah, I can see the split, and I can see how the culture and the atmosphere of the villages is like, no thanks, or yes. I mean, some people describe the villages, my wife did after the first month, it's like an adult Disneyland. Okay, I get that. But not everybody likes Disneyland either. Disneyland is a polarizing experience for many people too.
Yeah. The fact is, though, that's the beauty of, if you like that, then you move there. If you don't like that, then you'll find some place. Like I said, my parents living in Panama. There's so many other places that you can move to that will fit your style. Since we're speaking about some of those negatives, what kind of person wouldn't like the villages?
Maybe one person who wouldn't like the villages is the person who thinks they're being pressured to participate. You know, I've got to go golfing like 4 times a week, huh? Well, no thanks. But to me, that's sort of like I said much earlier in our interview, Jesse. If you want to just hang around your home, your villa, nobody's forcing you to partake of the recreational, social, cultural opportunities. But in many ways, you're paying a bit of a premium to be in a location that has them. So why are you there if that's the kind of lifestyle that you want? So I get that hesitation. For us, we like the fact that there are some nice restaurants, but we cook the vast majority of our meals in our homes that we spend time in there. So maybe you could sort of, in effect, in a way, fabricate, well, I don't want to go to the villages because there'll be no place to eat except fancy, expensive restaurants, if that's what you so choose. And as I said during the pre-interview, Jesse, there would be some who would say, well, you know, that's MAGA country. And the reality is that the vast majority of the people who live in the villages are Republican. There's no doubt about that. There's no denying it. Florida, of course, has turned from a purple state into a Republican state. But if you don't like seeing golf carts going around the villages flying little Trump flags, and I'm not a particular fan of that, but just ignore it. And you don't have to engage in political discourse with someone who you disagree with. But yeah, so there may be some people who would say, no, I'm not living at the villages. That's just Trump country, and that's not where I want to spend my snowbird season or spend my retirement. Okay, don't. For me, what I do is just try to ignore it. And when I'm on the pickleball court, when I'm in the swimming pool, when I'm on my bike, people aren't talking politics. The common topics are, boy, isn't it just another beautiful day? Or if you're on the golf course, which I don't golf, but I get that the person who's a golf addict, the villages is heaven to him, because that monthly fee includes no charge at any of the 45 9-hole executive courses. Then maybe they're complaining that their elbow is acting up and they can't hit the ball well. It's a pretty idyllic setting, but if it's not for you, and I'm sure it's not for many people, that's another reason why step one shouldn't be, from my perspective, step one shouldn't be buy and be a 9-month or a year-round person. Rent for a month. If you like it for that month, rent for 3 months and make it be a progressive kind of thing. I'm just curious, Jesse, did your parents, because they own a place in Panama that stays vacant when they're not there, did they just go whole hog and just buy it, or had they spent a month or two in Panama before deciding to make that be their principal wintertime home?
They traveled around for a while and spent time in different places. They spent time in Panama several times and liked it. I mean, they built themselves. They didn't buy an existing place. My dad was out there pouring cement, and they had friends dig out a pool and do that. They checked it out. There's other reasons. I know my dad, he didn't want to move to Florida because He said Florida wasn't hot enough for him, even in Key West.
Okay.
And they were worried about hurricanes, where Panama's never had a hurricane hit. There was a lot of factors for...
Oh, and I get the hurricane hesitation. If I ever considered buying a place in Florida, I'm not buying it within a mile of the coast, even though that's a wonderful place to be, because, you know, Hurricane Ian came through and wiped out a whole lot of people. And then, excuse me for forgetting the name of the hurricane that just went through this past September. And that was pretty bad too. So I get that fear. I get that hurricane fear. Wanted to talk about, if I may, another facet of the villages that for us made it a wonderful fallback when the Fort Myers place fell through because of the hurricane. And that's that the villages has hundreds of special interest groups. And the two in particular that I've gotten a big kick out of, one is called Beatlemaniacs. And Beatlemaniacs meets every Friday at 10 a.m. in the clubhouse of one of these neighborhood golf course, swimming pool, pickleball complexes. And it's typically about 30 men and women. Typically about 25 are playing guitar, and a couple of drummers and a couple of keyboards. And everybody's like between 60 and 90. And they're basically doing Beatles cover songs for an hour. And they take an annual trip to Liverpool and visit the typical sites in Liverpool. Let's go walk the sidewalk. One of us has to be barefoot and pretend to be Paul. And so Beatlemaniacs is an interesting group that I get a kick out of. And then they also have the world's largest chapter of the Blues Society. And they bring in notable, they can't get Joe Bonamassa because Joe Bonamassa is filling 5,000 seat theaters or 15,000 seat basketball arenas, but they get some pretty top quality blues entertainers who come in, and they'll charge $30, $40, something like that. And every Thursday, the Village Sun, which is sort of like the company newspaper, and having been a former newspaper reporter, probably the financially most healthy newspaper in the United States right now. And every Thursday, it's got an insert of about 60 pages that describes all the various facilities and all the various recreational, cultural, social opportunities. Oh, and I was able to think of someone else who maybe like, well, that's not my style at the villages. You probably, by your research, know that there's virtually as many golf carts as there are residents. And most people, maybe they feel pressured, some of them, they trick out their golf cart. So if they're coming from Pennsylvania, and if they're a Penn State fan, then they're going to have their golf cart will be dark blue, and it'll have a Nittany lion on the front, and it'll say Penn State on it. Or if you're from Wisconsin, your golf cart will be in red, and there'll be a big UW on it, and a Bucky Badger logo, or something like that. So that's one way in which people show their sort of where they're from. And then one thing I like about my brother-in-law's neighborhood, and others too, another way you sort of try to escape being viewed all the same, is how you color and design your driveway. And your driveway might have inlaid speckles of granite or something that sparkle. And maybe your driveway's purple, or maybe your driveway is green and has a big G logo for Green Bay Packers in the middle of your driveway. And for some people, they may go, that's really hokey. Count me out. That's not where I want to be.
Yeah, I was watching a video where they were talking about how there's a lot of white cars because, you know, black cars obviously will be a little bit hotter than a white car. And so they put different color loofahs on their cars so they can tell them apart when they're in a parking lot. And then they were saying how people like overread into like these loofahs as some type of like secret code
for preference.
Right.
What's your romantic inclination?
Right. When they say it's just
and I personally have never experienced that. But it's like, ooh, a purple loofah means you'll swing both ways, and a pink loofah means you prefer to be dominant versus submissive. And I'm just this ignorant Midwesterner. I'm not part of that subculture of the villages. So I don't have a loofah on my car, and I'm not sure the code well enough to know what color loofah I should have for just a guy with a boring one-on-one marriage of 45 years.
45 years. That's pretty good. Yeah. Congrats on that, Charlie.
Well, I think your parents have probably been married about that long too. Yeah. Okay.
45 exactly this in September. Yeah.
Yeah. So, the loofah culture is I don't, sounds interesting, but I don't know.
So what did you do, Charlie, before you retired?
Well, I had three sort of distinct careers. After graduation from UCLA, I spent several years working for Keith Jackson, who was Whoa Nelly. He was a sports announcer. And I served as his, to use an old-fashioned term, I was his leg man. I covered USC and UCLA football, UCLA basketball during the heyday of when they were winning all those national championships. And I'd interview players, edit the audio tape, and transmit it over phone line to his producer. Keith Jackson would say, I just spoke with John Wooden about the upcoming big game against Notre Dame. And John Wooden says, well, John Wooden talked to me. He didn't talk to Keith Jackson, but whatever. And then I worked for a variety of fledgling Southern California sports magazines, hoping to be regional versions of Sports Illustrated that all basically ended up dying. Because, I mean, Sports Illustrated lost money for 10 years. It only survived because it had Time magazine as the parent magazine making the money that kept it afloat. So I basically spent my 20s doing sports journalism for small newspapers. And then my wife decided, hey, how about a steady job? Let's maybe have a family. So I went into public relations for some major hospitals, worked for the City of Hope National Medical Center in Los Angeles, enjoyed that. Ended up moving back to my wife's home county in 1992, continued to work as the PR director of a local community hospital here, then decided to have more fun, and I became a reporter for a local Gannett daily newspaper, and I wrote about 3,500 stories in the last 16 years of my working career, having the best job in the county, and I covered state politics and business and local government and general assignment. I wouldn't trade the careers I had for anything. When I was 15, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I was growing up in Southern California. At 15, I knew that 25 years from then, I was going to be the LA Dodgers baseball play-by-play announcer. And I was going to replace Vin Scully. I retired before Vin Scully. I retired at 64. Vin Scully retired at 88. On top of his game, still the best baseball play-by-play announcer ever has been, ever will be, probably.
Isn't Bob Uecker still doing home games for the Brewers?
Bob Uecker, yes. And he's like 86, 87. As long as you still have your eyes and still have your brain and can dredge up, and Uecker, as opposed to Scully, Uecker is a pretty humorous guy, of course, and self-deprecating because he, of course, had a very mediocre baseball career, barely made the major leagues, but whatever. The shtick works. And people become enamored of baseball announcers. And Vin Scully especially was a very beloved figure in Southern California. And Scully got to the point where he just did home games too. Yeah.
It's pretty cool. You got to meet John Wooden, by the way.
Well, and John Wooden was an interesting character. He was known for never swearing, and he didn't. But through that rolled up program, sitting on the sidelines, he would yell at the referee, Get those guys' hands off Lou, meaning Lou Alcindor.
Yeah, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Yes, now Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, but of course he was Lou Alcindor at the UCLA days. And he would get on the referees, and he was, but he was smart, and he never got a technical foul, and he didn't get up off the bench and stride onto the court. He was able to make his presence felt just yelling through his rolled up program. And yes, the 4 years I went to UCLA, the team was 117-3 and won 88 straight games. And yes, UCLA had the best talent, but that doesn't necessarily mean you win. But anyway.
What advice would you give to someone that's not retirement age, but is looking to kind of set themselves up?
Live below your means. That's simple. I was picking up a pair of sunglasses today, and I said to the optician, I was looking forward to using these sunglasses when we go to Florida for 4 months. And she said, oh, that's so great that you get to go for that long. And she was probably in her early 30s. And I said, well, the key to spending that much time down south is to work hard, live below your means, and get old. So the live below your means, we drove a car for a long time that was 15 years old, then it was 16 years old. I only have an iPhone 12. I don't have an iPhone 13, 14, or 15. Of course, these days, the iPhones compete on having better and better cameras because the rest of the iPhone is so spectacular. Try to have fiscal discipline, but it's tough. We live in a materialistic society, and it's tough to resist the temptation to have a new car every 3 years. And it's tough to resist the temptation to have a 4,500 square foot house instead of a 2,500 square foot house. I get that, but I like the fact that we have the freedom now to go south, and we have the freedom to do some nice travel. We haven't met our goal yet of visiting every national park. We've only been to 26 of them, and there's now 63 national parks. They've added several in the last 4 or 5 years, and I doubt realistically if we'll ever get to the 6 national parks in Alaska. All of them are fly-in. I doubt if we will get to the 6 Alaska national parks, but I've been to Yosemite many times. And if you haven't been to Yosemite and come out of Wawona Tunnel and seen El Capitan, Yosemite Valley, and Half Moon Dome, I can't imagine a hardly more spectacular place on earth. But there's still a lot of them to go that are going to be. Acadia in Maine is certainly on the bucket list. And then worldwide, I've got all sorts of people are raving about Iceland, but I've got a lot of places I want to go before I go to Iceland. In many ways, I'd rather go to Panama before I go to Iceland.
I've only been to 3 national parks in Alaska, and I doubt I'll hit the other 3.
The reality is, if you're going, I mean, my mother's been to 108 countries, and if you're going to go to 100 countries, you need to have energy, curiosity, and money. It's not cheap to go to Antarctica. There's no cheap way to go to Antarctica. And I don't think realistically, there's not a cheap way to go to Tokyo.
Like, I've traveled a lot, and I feel like a lot of people have this checklist, and they don't really have fun. They're just like checking a list. Like, oh, I've been to 100 countries. It's like, I worked in ski resorts. I worked in Denali National Park. I worked in Hawaii. I worked on a cruise ship. And I think when you can just settle down, have friends, like, I would think, actually, like my parents, where you go back to Panama and you have friends, you have pickleball groups, you have dancing days and yoga and water aerobics. People can kind of laugh at that when they're young, but everyone kind of judges the older people like, oh, I would never do a cruise, or I would never do this. But everyone ages. Everyone eventually thinks the same. Yeah. To me, like, just having a checklist and not actually enjoying it. The biggest indicator to longevity is the number of close connections. It's not if you smoke. It's not if you drink. It's not if you exercise. It's not how much money you have. It's, do you have friends? And do you have close friends? Do you have positive relationships? And if you travel and you're constantly moving around, you're not going to have friends.
And I think sociologists have said that the 2 particular areas where people are living into their 90s routinely are small villages in Japan and Greece. And it's their social and oftentimes multi-generational social connections that keep, there's a reason for them to get up in the morning. They're 98, but they get up because they go down to the little coffee shop and they get greeted by name, and they see their friends and they see their friends' kids. And it's like, how you doing today? People genuinely, sincerely asking, how are you? And that social interconnections is the key to having a long, hopefully happy life. Now, I've had 2 siblings die, and the older I get, the more I realize how much of your happiness is connected to physically having a baseline of decent health. You don't have to be in great health. And sometimes you die way premature, just unlucky. And that was the case with my 2 siblings, health conditions that they could not have prevented. So every day when I wake up and I'm feeling pretty good, I don't feel physically like I did 30 years ago. That would be unrealistic. As long as you've got your physical health and your mental health, then life's great. And it's greater if you've got other people to share it with.
Before, when you talked about Hawaii and Arizona, Alabama, and Florida, did you notice a difference in those locations between, say, healthcare, safety, ease of traveling, cost of living on electricity, or different utilities?
Healthcare, I can't really comment on because I haven't really needed it. I'm basically a healthy person. My wife is too, and we very, very rarely have needed healthcare. But certainly, now, if you want to get into the costs, oh, it's scary how expensive. And you said you worked in Hawaii. What's scary is when you go to the big supermarket on Maui and the prices are as if you were at a high-priced corner convenience store. And it explains why such a high percentage of Hawaiians meet the poverty index. When you go into Hawaii, I mean, like if you and I teleported ourselves to Wailuku, we couldn't teleport ourselves to Lahaina's Safeway because it burned down. But if we were in Wailuku at the Safeway supermarket and a dozen eggs are $6.50 and a gallon of milk is $7.25 and a gallon of gas is $5.75, and you think to yourself as the tourist, and this is what the locals are paying year round. So Hawaii, to me, is the outlier for having incredible high cost of living. Well, it's paradise for the visitor and maybe paradise for the person who's there for 2 months or 3 months. But man, can you afford to live there year round? Not a whole lot of people can. It is interesting to me that Florida has no sales tax on food, but Alabama is 10%. And I thought that was an interesting, and that obviously has some financial impact, you know, when you're buying $150 worth of groceries every week. So that would be a difference. Transportation-wise, no, we don't snowbird in rural parts of any of these states where we're having to take old back 2-lane roads to get to them. So it's tough to address that factor. I would say the factor that influences not just people younger than me, but people of my age too, that influences where you want to stay is technology, specifically Wi-Fi speed, not Wi-Fi availability, but Wi-Fi speed. And one of the things we do is I take 2 Apple TV pucks with us wherever we go. And I have a YouTube TV subscription. And I basically watch YouTube TV and use AirPlay and can AirPlay things from my iPhones and my iPads to the TV of wherever I'm staying. So Wi-Fi connection is important. It's also important because then you've got a better picture typically for FaceTiming. And my wife often asks, would we spend as much time out of state as we do if we didn't have the availability to FaceTime our grandchildren? And because we FaceTime them once or twice a week when we're not in Wisconsin. And no, you can't physically touch and hug, but you can still see their faces. And you could still hear them say, love you, Grandpa. So, yeah, I think technology. Now, I actually am sort of a schizophrenic type of person. I don't have a problem, in effect, cutting off all the technology and being totally isolated for a while. But when I am connected, I want to be well connected. As far back as maybe 15 years ago, I said, you know, someday we're going to be watching our TV programs via Wi-Fi. And the Wi-Fi is going to be good enough that you're going to get a good image on a 70-inch TV via Wi-Fi. And if you ask someone of your generation, you either have to lose your satellite and cable subscription, or you have to lose your Wi-Fi connection. Satellite and cable are gone. You'll be just fine with just a Wi-Fi connection.
Oh yeah, I'm fine with no connection, to be honest. So, Charlie, if you had unlimited funds, would you do anything differently? I mean, would you buy?
Yes, you should have had unlimited funds.
Yeah, what would you do?
Here's what I would do differently. But my wife wouldn't go along with it. The longest cruise I can get her to do with me is 2 weeks. Now, when we went from Barcelona to Venice, that was the first 2 legs of a cruise, the most popular Mediterranean cruise Viking does. Week 1, Barcelona to Rome. Week 2, Rome to Venice. Week 3, Venice to Athens. Week 4, Athens to Istanbul. If I had unlimited funds, I would be looking at, do I want to do the 140-day around the world cruise on Viking out of Fort Lauderdale, or the 120-day cruise, because that cruise goes to the Panama Canal, ends up in LA, Or would I do the 120-day cruise that then starts in LA, and they both end up in London? With unlimited funds, I would be tempted, but my wife wouldn't go for it. So it's not, well, one, I don't have unlimited. Two, I prefer to stay married. You know, of course, about this ship that hasn't left, and they're running into trouble, and people were buying like a small little 1-bedroom unit for like $750,000, and they were buying a 3-bedroom unit for like $4 million, and it basically is going to sail year round and go to hundreds of ports, and the owners will vote quarterly on where they want to go, and basically the ship has become their one and only home. Now maybe, and there you'd want to transition. I talked about how people should rent for a month in the villages. Realistically, before I'm going to get on a 120-day cruise, let's just see if I can go 3 weeks and then 4 weeks.
So if you had unlimited funds, would that be a once-in-a-lifetime thing, doing that year-round cruise, or would you be looking to buy that $750,000 room in that yacht that's constantly cruising around?
Well, I guess I'd say start with a 4-week cruise first. Actually, what my parents did that I thought was really cool, they were in their mid-60s, and they owned a home in Hillsborough, California, a tony suburb of San Francisco. It's the third highest per capita income congressional district of the 435. And they house swapped. They basically took a London townhouse flat near Hyde Park of an English couple. The English couple came to California and took their Hillsborough house for 6 months. And then my parents rented a car for 6 months, and they drove all over England and Scotland, took it on a ferry over to Ireland, Northern Ireland, went under the Channel, went all over Western Europe. That's pretty cool, because then you're doing what you talked about a while back. It's not like today is Belgium, tomorrow is Luxembourg, the next day is Switzerland. When you've got that kind of thing going, when you're going to be there for 6 months, and it gave them the freedom that it was like, okay, well, let's go to Munich, and maybe we'll spend 2 days there, and then we'll move on to Berlin. You go to Munich, and you realize, wait a minute, there's a lot more interesting things to do here than what we thought there were. Let's just stay another day. Oh, well, maybe we'll stay another day. But it takes you said unlimited funds, because, you know, if you're going to have the flexibility, and this is assuming you're staying in, even if it's an only $100 a night hotel, and how many $100 a night hotels are there in Munich or Berlin, you're going to rack up some pretty high expenses pretty quick. And let's be realistic. Most people that are in their 60s and 70s are not going to be hostile type people who are willing to stay in places with shared bathrooms and shared rooms and bunk beds. That's a whole nother category of people that are going to be about 35 years younger than I am.
So what percentage of people, say at the villages, would you say are kind of in that low budget? They're there trying to go skimp.
I'd be surprised if it's more than 15, 20%. To me, the sort of demarcation or a key factor that would indicate that they're trying to have and survive in the villages on that lifestyle is how many people live in the villages who are literally trying to get by on nothing but their Social Security. Because as you well know, pensions, except in the public sector, are pretty much a thing of the past. There are very, very few companies these days that offer true pensions. I think the automakers still might, and a few others. Pensions are gone. So unless they have generated a whole lot of savings or invested really, really well and gotten lucky, it's scary what percentage of seniors are trying to get by on just their Social Security. And if you're going to try to get by in the villages on just your Social Security, you're not going to be making mortgage. Maybe you've already got that smaller home paid off, because otherwise it's going to be awfully tough. So I'm thinking a relatively small percentage. It's not an expensive place to live, or at least it doesn't. The villages doesn't have to be an expensive place to live. You don't have to go out to eat, 5 dinners out of 7. I'm sure there are, and I know some people, their lifestyle is to go out to dinner every night. Well, that adds up pretty quick. If funds were unlimited, I wouldn't even want to go out to dinner every night. That's okay. I can fix for myself the majority.
Well, if you had unlimited funds, you'd have a personal chef who would in your house, right?
Sure.
So what?
And that would be a nice perk, but no, never gonna happen. Yeah.
So Charlie, for a person that's thinking of retiring, that wants to have fun, be able to do things, kind of live, the retirement lifestyle that you see on social media, TV, how much would you say you need to plan on having per year?
I was going to give you a monthly. And
monthly's fine too.
Yeah, I would. I mean, you better think you're going to be spending $8,000 to $10,000 a month, because that's going to cover your housing, that's going to cover your food, it's going to cover car transportation costs. Let's assume that you're not going to stay inside the house every night. For example, at the Villages, they have 2 performing arts theaters. One of them seats about 1,200. One of them seats about 800. And the one that seats 1,200, called the Morse, the Sharon L. Morse Theater, features touring mainline acts. And a perfect example of someone who comes to the Villages, and you're going to pay $150 to see them, Frankie Valli, the Beach Boys. So the Beach Boys go to the Villages, and you're going to pay $145 for your ticket. At the other theater, called the Savannah, and that's about 800, you're going to pay between $40 and $80 for a regional touring company that's going to be putting on a musical, or is a Journey cover band or something like that, or a School of Rock, that kind of thing. So yeah, you better have around $8,000 to $10,000 a month for your housing, your groceries, your recreation, your entertainment.
So in that 8,000 to 10,000, is this only for, say, your Snowbird months? So you're 8 months here in Wisconsin.
Correct.
Are you excluding that? So
I'm excluding that. Excluding that because, like I say, our house is paid off. Now, obviously, we've got fixed expenses here too. And when we're gone, we keep our house at about 60 degrees. And depending upon how cold it is, that furnace is running 24 hours a day. And it's not like you get to suspend your homeowner's insurance. We take one of our 2 cars to Florida. So we suspend, and I was naive enough, foolish, stupid enough, that for the first several years we snowbirded, I didn't suspend the automobile insurance coverage on the car that was still here in Wisconsin in the garage. Now, granted, it only saves about $250 to $300 for the 4 months to suspend that automobile insurance coverage. But when you get to be my age, we're a little bit scary, not to telemarketers, but we will fight like heck to try to save $6, $10 on something, because we have the time to stay on hold for an hour and a half. The perfect example is Sirius XM radio. Sirius XM radio comes with every new car. You get a 6-month trial subscription. At the end of that 6-month trial subscription, they want to take you to $18.99 a month. So after that 6 months, they let me know you're going to go to $18.99, and I call them up and I go, no, you'll charge me $6 a month. If I was a new customer, I want to pay the same rate as the new customer. And it takes 10, 15 minutes to jump up 2 levels of customer service to eventually get to the person who'll say, okay, we'll give you the Sirius XM for $6 a month, not $19 a month, but you multiply 13 times 12, and I've saved $170. And $170 can be a couple of nice meals. So yeah, my age group, when we're retired, I'm sure that some folks vendors don't particularly like us being on the phone, because we've got all day to fight for that $12 or $120.
Charlie, thanks for joining us. Just give us a concluding thought.
When you retire, you're going to potentially create new circles of friends. Don't forget about the circles of friends that you already have had. I'm fortunate enough to have many circles of friends. I have pickleball friends. I have bicycling friends. I have YMCA friends. I have Manitowoc Golden K Kiwanis friends. By retiring, you are going to have more time to either spend more time doing activities that you already enjoy, but open yourself up to the possibility of taking on new activities, new pursuits, new passions. It might be substitute teaching. It might be learning a new art and craft. Maybe you'll become an amateur painter. Maybe you hated drawing in high school, But now that you're retired and you don't have a teacher to critique your work, go for it and be physically active, because if you're not physically active, it's tough to be mentally sharp, and just enjoy your new-found time.
My dear friends, that is it for this episode of El Podcast. Once again, if you're not yet subscribed, please subscribe on YouTube as well as Rumble. You can also find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts from. We thank you all from the bottom of our hearts for watching and listening, and we will see you on the next episode.